It was a bright Saturday morning, and the sun poured gently through the tall glass windows of the Caldwell residence. To the outside world, it was a mansion of success, the kind of home people slowed their cars to admire when driving past. Perfectly cut lawns, fountains whispering in the driveway, and a house that seemed almost untouchable. Inside, however, the air felt strangely heavy. At the center of that house was Evelyn Caldwell, a woman the world knew as one of the youngest CEOs in the country. Her name appeared in magazines and business journals, always attached to headlines about growth, resilience, and leadership. To her employees, she was sharp and unshakable. To her peers, she was powerful. But here, within her own walls, none of those titles mattered. Here she was just a mother, and one who was failing in the role she wished mattered most. Her daughter Emily sat at the long dining table. In front of her was a cake with 6 candles untouched, 6 years old. But the silence around her made the room feel far older. Emily's brown eyes were deep and searching, her tiny hands resting politely on her lap as though she had been trained to sit still. She wore a white dress with little golden buttons chosen by Evelyn, though Emily never asked for anything. She never asked at all, because Emily had never spoken a word. Doctors had told Evelyn there was nothing physically wrong with her child's voice. Her vocal cords worked. Her hearing was fine. The silence was not caused by a broken body, but by something no machine could measure. Trauma, they called it. Emotional withdrawal, a protective wall that Emily had built inside herself before she even learned how to live in the world. Evelyn had tried everything: therapy, specialists, schools that promised miracles. But the outcome was always the same. Emily stayed silent. That morning, Evelyn lit the candles and softly whispered, "Make a wish, sweetheart." Emily stared at the flames, her lips parting slightly as if she wanted to say something. Evelyn's heart leapt, but then the moment passed and Emily leaned forward, puffing out her cheeks, and blew the candles out without a sound. The housekeeper clapped politely in the corner. Evelyn forced a smile. 6 birthdays, Evelyn thought. 6 birthdays without hearing her little girl say "Mama." She had built empires, conquered boardrooms, fought competitors twice her size. But here she sat helpless in front of the one person she wished to understand most. Her heart ached in ways no amount of money or power could soothe. She wanted to cry, but she swallowed the feeling. She always swallowed it, because she thought strength meant never showing her weakness. After a quiet meal, Evelyn suggested a trip. "Let's go to the park today," she said gently, brushing Emily's hair back. Emily looked up, her dark lashes blinking, but she gave no reply. She never did. The park was not a place Evelyn visited often. She feared stares, whispers, questions. It was easier to keep Emily at home where silence was not judged. But today something inside her whispered that maybe the world outside might give her daughter something she could not. The park was alive with sound. Children's laughter echoed across the swings and slides. Parents chatted on benches, the smell of grass mixing with the faint sweetness of nearby flowers. For Emily, who rarely left the safe walls of her home, the noise seemed almost overwhelming. She clutched the hem of her dress as Evelyn guided her toward the playground. "Would you like to swing, darling?" Evelyn asked. Emily hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Evelyn placed her carefully on the swing, her white shoes dangling above the wood chips below. She pushed her gently, and for a brief moment, Evelyn felt something like hope as Emily's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Nearby, a man was playing with his son. His laughter was deep and warm, carrying across the park. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a kindness in his eyes that made even strangers feel safe. His son, a boy about the same age as Emily, ran with boundless energy, calling out words with excitement that only children could manage. Evelyn noticed them. She always noticed fathers. They reminded her of what Emily never had. She had raised her child alone, her husband having passed before Emily was even born. Since then, Evelyn had done everything in her power to fill the empty space. But she knew deep inside, her daughter was growing up without the softness of a father's hand, without the balance of 2 voices shaping her world. The man's gaze eventually drifted toward Evelyn and Emily. His son had run off to climb the slide, and the man's eyes softened when he saw the little girl sitting silently on the swing. He walked closer, but not in a way that felt intrusive. There was patience in his steps, as though he understood that some children needed gentleness, not rush. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said with a smile. Evelyn nodded politely. It is. His eyes moved to Emily. She looks like she enjoys the swing. She does, Evelyn replied, her voice quieter now. She was not used to explaining her daughter to strangers. Most people, upon realizing Emily did not speak, either grew awkward or asked questions that cut too deeply. But this man did not ask. He simply smiled and crouched down, lowering himself to Emily's level. Hi there, he said softly to her, not waiting for a response. My name's Marcus. That little boy over there is my son, Jaden. He likes to climb even though I tell him not to. He chuckled, and his laugh made Emily blink in curiosity. Marcus continued, his voice calm and even. You like swings, huh? I used to love swings when I was your age. I thought if I went high enough, maybe I could touch the clouds. For the first time, Emily's lips parted, not to speak but to form a faint, breathy laugh. Evelyn froze. She had not heard even that sound in so long. Her chest tightened, her eyes wide. Marcus noticed. He did not push. He simply smiled wider and leaned a little closer. You know what? I bet if we swing high enough, we can both touch the clouds together. What do you think? Emily's eyes shone, her small hands gripping the chains of the swing. She did not answer with words, but the light in her eyes was louder than any voice. Evelyn stood silently behind them, her hand rising slowly to cover her mouth. Something was happening. Something she could not explain, but she felt it deep in her bones. For 6 years, no therapy, no doctors, no experts had broken through to her daughter. But here, in a sunlit park, a man she had never met was reaching her in ways she never imagined possible. And Evelyn's heart whispered a thought that made her knees weak. What if this was the moment? Marcus stayed crouched near the swing, his eyes soft and patient, while Emily held onto the chains with her small hands. The air around them seemed to grow still, as if the sounds of other children's laughter and chatter in the park faded into the background. Evelyn stood a few steps away, frozen in place, unsure whether to intervene or let this stranger continue. She had always guarded her daughter closely, afraid of judgment or pity. But something about this man felt different. He was not looking at Emily like she was broken. He was looking at her as though she was whole. Emily's gaze followed Marcus's hand as he pointed toward the sky. Look, he said warmly. Do you see that cloud up there? It looks like a big white dog, doesn't it? With floppy ears. Emily blinked, then tilted her head, her lips pressing together. She raised her hand slowly, pointing at the same cloud. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. Her daughter rarely reacted this way with strangers. Marcus smiled, not making a fuss, but his eyes glowed with encouragement. Exactly, he whispered. You see it too. That's pretty cool. From the slide, Jaden called out to his father, Daddy, look at me. He waved, his face full of joy as he slid down with a triumphant laugh. Marcus gave him a quick thumbs up before turning back to Emily. That's my boy. He never stops talking. He chuckled, then leaned closer, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. You know, sometimes I have to tell him to quiet down because he talks even in his sleep. Emily's lips quivered and a tiny puff of air escaped her mouth, almost like the beginning of a laugh. Evelyn felt her throat tighten, tears stinging her eyes. She placed her hand over her chest, trying to steady herself. Marcus looked up at Evelyn briefly. Their eyes met, and he gave her a reassuring nod as if to say, It's okay. Trust me. It was strange. Evelyn was not used to trusting strangers, yet something about the calmness in his expression told her she could. He turned back to Emily. Do you want to see a trick? He asked, his tone playful but not pushy. Emily's brows lifted, and she gave the smallest of nods. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin. With a flick of his hand, he made it disappear, then pretended to look around as if searching for it. Emily's eyes widened. He reached behind her ear and pulled it out, grinning. Found it. You must have been keeping it safe. This time Emily's shoulders shook with a silent laugh. Evelyn's breath caught. Her daughter was not just reacting. She was engaging. Marcus clapped his hands together lightly. You're good at this. You helped me find it. He leaned in and whispered, I think you have magic. Jaden came running over, his cheeks flushed. Daddy, show her the card trick. Marcus ruffled his son's hair. Not yet, champ. We'll save that one. He looked back at Emily. Do you want to play a game with us? You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Just nod or shake your head. Emily hesitated, then nodded once. Evelyn felt her knees weaken. Her daughter had never agreed to play with anyone outside of her own home. She gripped the side of the swing for balance as Marcus and Jaden began a simple pointing game. Jaden would point at something, the slide, the tree, the sky, and say its name. Emily's job was only to nod or shake her head depending on whether she liked it. "The slide," Jaden said proudly. Emily shook her head. Jaden giggled. "You don't like it?" "That's okay." "The swings," Marcus said. Emily nodded and Jaden clapped his hands. "Me too, swings are the best." "The clouds," Marcus added softly. Emily nodded again, her lips curving into a tiny smile. Evelyn could barely breathe as she watched the scene unfold. For the first time, her daughter was not just a silent observer, but part of the rhythm of play, part of a conversation without words. Minutes passed, and the game continued. Each small response from Emily seemed to draw her further out of her shell. Evelyn could see the light returning to her eyes, a light she thought she might never see again. Finally, Marcus leaned closer, his voice gentle. "Do you know what I think?" He paused, his eyes kind but serious. "I think you have a beautiful voice inside you, and one day when you're ready, you'll let us hear it." Emily's lips parted, and for a moment, Evelyn thought she might speak. Instead, Emily looked at her mother, her expression almost asking permission. Evelyn's hand trembled as she whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe." The little girl's chest rose and fell quickly. Then with a shaky breath, she whispered something so faint. Evelyn almost thought she imagined it. One word, broken and fragile, but real. "Hi." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She staggered back a step, unable to believe what she had just heard. 6 years of silence broken by a single syllable. Marcus froze, his eyes widening, and Jaden's jaw dropped. "Did she—" Marcus began, his voice low. Evelyn nodded, her whole body trembling. "She did. She spoke." Emily blinked as if startled by her own voice. Then she whispered again, "Hi." This time it was clearer. She looked at Marcus, then at Jaden, her small hands gripping the swing chains tightly as though holding on to courage itself. Marcus's eyes softened even more. He did not cheer loudly or make a scene. He only smiled and said warmly, "Hi, sweetheart. It's so nice to finally hear you." Jaden, unable to contain his excitement, clapped his hands. "She talked, Daddy. She talked." Evelyn dropped to her knees beside the swing, tears wetting her cheeks as she cupped her daughter's face. "Emily," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you did it. You spoke." Emily's eyes filled with tears too, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of release, of a weight finally beginning to lift. She whispered again, her voice steadier now. "Mama." Evelyn broke down completely, pressing her forehead against her daughter's, sobbing in relief. "Yes, baby. Mama's here. I'm here." The world around them seemed to stop. For Evelyn, this was the moment she had prayed for every single day of her daughter's life. For Marcus, it was proof that sometimes all a child needed was patience and love. And for Emily, it was the first step into a life where her voice would finally be heard. As Evelyn held her daughter close, she looked up at Marcus through blurred vision. Her lips trembled, but her heart spoke for her. Gratitude, awe, and a sense of destiny. She knew this encounter was no accident. This man, this father, had walked into their lives for a reason. And in that moment, Evelyn understood something she had long forgotten. Healing did not always come from experts, from doctors, or from endless resources. Sometimes it came from the simplest acts of kindness, from the courage of strangers who refused to see a child as broken. Emily's small voice echoed in Evelyn's heart, and for the first time in years, hope felt alive again. The sun had dipped slightly lower in the sky, casting long golden rays over the playground. The air seemed to carry a different weight now, as if the very world had paused to honor what had just happened. Evelyn still knelt by the swing, clutching her daughter as though she might vanish if she let go. Emily had spoken. The single word still echoed in Evelyn's mind like a bell she never thought she would hear. "Hi." And then Mama. It was as if her entire heart had been stitched back together in that instant. Marcus stood nearby, quiet but steady, watching the scene with warmth in his eyes. He did not step forward to claim any glory, nor did he speak loudly about what had just unfolded. He simply let the moment belong to Evelyn and her child. Jaden, however, bounced with excitement, his voice ringing out with joy. "Daddy, she really talked." She said hi, and then she said Mama. He clapped his hands and jumped in a little circle, as only a child could when happiness overflowed. Emily looked at him, her small face flushing with a mixture of shyness and pride. She opened her mouth again, and though her voice was faint and shaky, she whispered, "Hi." This time she directed it at Jaden. The boy's eyes widened, and he grinned so brightly that Evelyn thought his smile could light up the entire park. "Hi!" he shouted back, not out of mockery but with pure delight. He leaned closer and whispered, "You sound awesome." Evelyn felt her tears roll freely, but for the first time they were not tears of helplessness. They were tears of release. For 6 years she had carried the weight of unanswered prayers, of appointments and tests that ended in disappointment, of long nights where she lay awake wondering if she had failed her child. And now here it was. A single fragile voice had broken the silence that had wrapped around their lives for so long. She finally stood, brushing her tears but keeping her hand gently on Emily's shoulder. She looked at Marcus, her lips trembling. "I don't know how. I don't know what you did, but—" Her voice broke and she pressed her hand to her chest. She spoke. "You made her speak?" Marcus shook his head gently, his expression calm. "No, she did that. She found the courage herself. I just gave her a safe moment to try." Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist that he had somehow worked a miracle, but she saw the truth in his eyes. Emily had chosen this moment. She had trusted, she had felt safe enough to let her voice out, and that had made all the difference. Emily was still sitting on the swing, her tiny hands wrapped around the chains, her wide eyes looking back and forth between her mother, Marcus, and Jaden, her lips parted again as though she was testing her own voice. This time she whispered a single word toward Marcus. "Thank—" It was not complete, the word fragile and broken at the edges, but Evelyn nearly collapsed hearing it. Marcus leaned closer, his smile warm but not overwhelming. "You're welcome," he whispered back, completing her thought as though he had heard it perfectly. The children played a little longer. Jaden encouraged Emily, speaking to her as though her silence had never existed, celebrating every tiny sound she made. Sometimes she only mouthed the words. Sometimes she let a whisper slip through, but each attempt filled Evelyn's heart with waves of gratitude and wonder. It was as though a dam had cracked, and for the first time water was beginning to flow. When the sun began to lower further, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Evelyn knew it was time to leave. She crouched beside her daughter and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "shall we go home?" Emily looked at her, her mouth opening slightly. It seemed she wanted to answer, but she hesitated, biting her lip. Marcus knelt beside them. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to say everything all at once. One word at a time is more than enough." Emily's lips trembled, and then she whispered, "Home." Evelyn's heart nearly burst. She gathered her daughter in her arms, holding her tightly. "Yes, baby, home." They stood together, and Evelyn turned to Marcus. For a moment she did not know what to say. How could she possibly thank him for what had just happened? She had money, influence, resources, yet none of that had opened her daughter's voice. And here stood a man she had only met today, a single father who had given her the most priceless gift of all. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally, her voice shaking. Marcus smiled, his gaze steady. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep believing in her. She's stronger than you think." Jaden tugged on his father's sleeve. "Daddy, can we play with her again?" "She's my new friend." His excitement was pure, unfiltered. Evelyn's heart softened even more at the sight. Her daughter had not only spoken for the first time today, she had made a friend. Evelyn looked at Marcus, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Maybe we'll see you here again." Marcus nodded. "We come here a lot. It's our favorite place. You're welcome to join us any time." As Evelyn walked back to her car with Emily's hand in hers, she kept glancing at her daughter. The little girl seemed lighter, her steps not as hesitant as before. She looked up at her mother once, her lips parting. "Mama," she whispered again. The sound was so soft that anyone else might have missed it, but for Evelyn, it was the most beautiful melody she had ever heard. By the time they reached the car, Evelyn was crying again, though she tried to hide it from Emily. She buckled her daughter into the seat, then paused, taking her small hand into her own. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Emily looked at her, her lips curving into a timid smile. It was not a full grin yet, but it was enough to tell Evelyn that something had shifted forever. As she drove home, Evelyn's thoughts raced. She replayed the moment over and over. The way Marcus had crouched down to Emily's level. The way he had spoken to her without treating her like she was fragile. The way he had created space for her to feel safe. She realized how often she herself had tried too hard, pushing therapists, doctors, experts into Emily's life, hoping someone would break the silence. Yet perhaps what Emily had needed all along was not pressure, not science, but simple human connection. The mansion greeted them with its usual silence. But for the first time, Evelyn felt hope filling its halls. She carried Emily inside and sat with her on the couch, holding her close. The little girl laid her head against her mother's chest, whispering something Evelyn could barely make out. "Safe," she murmured, her voice still soft, but clear enough to send Evelyn's tears flowing once more. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep in her bed, Evelyn stood at the doorway watching her daughter breathe. She whispered to herself, "You're safe now, my love, and you're finding your way back to me." As she turned off the light, Evelyn's mind drifted to Marcus and his son, a stranger who had entered their lives for only an hour, yet had left an imprint she could never forget. She knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something larger, something life-changing. And as she finally lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling, Evelyn allowed herself a fragile smile. For the first time in years, she felt she was not fighting this battle alone. The following days passed slowly, yet for Evelyn they carried a new rhythm. Every morning she woke with the memory of her daughter's fragile voice echoing in her mind. That single word, "Mama," had changed everything. She moved through her boardroom meetings differently now, her mind no longer fully consumed by contracts and figures. She found herself staring at photographs of Emily during breaks, whispering silent promises that she would never again let her daughter's silence define her life. Yet with all the joy there was also fear that it had been only a fleeting miracle, that Emily's voice would retreat back into its quiet prison and never return. Evelyn tried not to let that thought grow, but it haunted her in moments of stillness. One evening after a long day at the office, Evelyn came home to find Emily sitting in the living room with crayons scattered across the carpet. The little girl was drawing shapes on a wide sheet of paper, clouds, trees, and two figures holding hands. Evelyn lowered herself slowly to the floor, studying the picture. She could tell one of the figures was Emily herself, with a small white dress and golden buttons drawn with surprising detail. The other figure was a boy with curly hair. "Jaden," Evelyn whispered softly. Emily glanced up, her big eyes shining with a flicker of recognition. Her lips parted, and for a moment Evelyn held her breath. Then came the quietest whisper. "Friend." It was shaky, but it was there. Evelyn's heart leapt. She cupped her daughter's cheek and kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. He's your friend." She felt her throat tighten with gratitude. That simple word carried so much meaning. Her daughter not only remembered the boy, but had given him a name in her own way. That night, as Evelyn tucked Emily into bed, she thought about Marcus and Jaden. She thought about how they had appeared almost like a gift, like a doorway opening at the exact moment she needed it. She debated for hours whether to return to the park, whether to seek them again. Pride whispered that she should not rely on strangers, that her daughter's healing was her responsibility. But her heart told her something different, that sometimes life sends people for reasons we do not understand, and ignoring them would be a mistake. The next weekend, Evelyn dressed Emily in a simple blue dress and drove back to the same playground. The morning sun warmed the air, and the sound of children's laughter greeted them again. Evelyn's chest tightened with nervousness. What if Marcus and Jaden were not there this time? What if Emily withdrew back into silence without their presence? She tried to steady her breathing as they walked across the grass. To her relief, she saw them near the swings. Jaden was climbing the jungle gym, shouting triumphantly each time he reached a new level, while Marcus stood nearby, watching with patient amusement. When he noticed Evelyn and Emily, his face brightened with recognition. He raised a hand in greeting. "Hey there," he called warmly. Emily froze beside her mother, gripping her hand tightly. Her eyes were locked on Jaden, her lips parted slightly. Evelyn crouched down and whispered, "It's okay, darling. He's your friend, remember?" Emily's little hand trembled in hers, but she gave a small nod. Jaden spotted them and bounded over with uncontainable joy. "Hi, you came back." He beamed at Emily. "Want to play?" Emily hesitated, glancing at her mother. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm and reassuring. No rush, sweetheart. You can just watch if you want. We're glad you're here. Something in his tone gave Emily courage. She released her mother's hand slowly and followed Jaden toward the swings. Evelyn stayed close, her heart pounding with both fear and hope. She watched as Jaden began swinging, pumping his legs with energy. Come on, it's fun, he shouted. Emily touched the swing next to him, then sat down carefully. Marcus gave her a gentle push, not too strong, just enough to make her feel the rhythm. As she swayed back and forth, Emily let out a soft giggle, a sound Evelyn had not heard in years. It was faint but filled with pure delight. Marcus smiled. There it is. That's the sound we've been waiting for. Jaden turned to her mid-swing. Say higher, he called. Emily's lips parted. For a moment it looked as if she might retreat, but then she whispered, higher. The word was thin, almost swallowed by the air, but Jaden heard it. He cheered loudly, pumping his legs harder. She said it, Daddy. She said higher. Evelyn clapped her hand over her mouth, tears rushing to her eyes. She could hardly stand from the wave of emotion. Marcus looked at her with quiet understanding, his eyes steady and warm. He gave her a small nod as though reminding her to breathe, to let her daughter find her own pace. The children played for nearly an hour. Sometimes Emily was silent, sometimes she whispered single words, cloud, swing, friend, but each one felt like a miracle. Jaden treated every sound as if it were the greatest achievement in the world, celebrating without pity, only joy. Evelyn realized how important that was. Her daughter was not being pitied, she was being included. When they finally sat on the grass for a break, Marcus pulled 2 small juice boxes from his bag and handed them to the children. Emily hesitated before taking hers, but when Jaden poked the straw into his and drank noisily, she copied him. She whispered juice, as if testing the word. Evelyn nearly cried again. Marcus glanced at her softly. She's not afraid here, he said quietly. That's why she's trying. Kids don't bloom under pressure. They bloom when they feel safe. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat aching with unspoken emotions. I've tried so many ways, she admitted, her voice trembling. Therapists, specialists, programs. Nothing ever worked. Marcus shrugged gently. Maybe it wasn't about fixing her. Maybe it was about letting her be seen. The words pierced Evelyn's heart. She realized he was right. She had spent years fighting to solve her daughter's silence like a problem, instead of simply giving her space to be loved as she was. As the sun began to set and they prepared to leave, Emily surprised everyone. She turned to Jaden, her small face glowing with timid courage. In a voice just above a whisper, she said, Bye. Jaden grinned so wide his dimples showed. Bye, see you soon. Evelyn's heart swelled with pride. She looked at Marcus, tears slipping down her cheeks again. She's speaking, little by little. Because of you. Marcus shook his head. Because of her. And because of you. You're her anchor. On the drive home, Evelyn kept glancing at her daughter in the rearview mirror. Emily sat quietly, holding her juice box, but her lips curved into a faint smile. Every so often she whispered a word to herself, almost like she was practicing. Evelyn gripped the steering wheel tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude. For the first time in 6 long years, she felt like her daughter's silence was no longer a prison. It was a doorway slowly opening. That night, Evelyn tucked Emily into bed and kissed her forehead. As she turned to leave, she heard the tiniest whisper behind her. Mama. Evelyn froze, her heart aching in the best way. She turned back, smiling through her tears. Yes, my love. Emily's lips curved upward. Happy. Evelyn collapsed to her knees beside the bed, pressing her hand over her mouth as tears streamed uncontrollably. She whispered back, Me too, sweetheart. Me too. The days that followed felt like Evelyn was living inside a dream she did not want to wake from. Each morning when she opened her eyes, her first thought was of Emily's fragile voice saying, Mama, happy home. Words so small in the ears of the world, yet words so powerful they carried enough weight to crush years of fear and doubt she had carried. She found herself moving through her work with a softness she had never known before. She had built her entire career on being sharp, on being decisive, on being the woman who could outthink anyone in the room. But now she moved slower, she smiled more, and when colleagues whispered about her seeming distracted, she did not care. She knew where her heart truly belonged. At home, she watched Emily bloom in ways she had not dared to dream of. The silence was still there, but it was no longer a heavy wall. It was becoming something like a doorway, one that Emily was pushing open word by word. Some days she spoke only one word, sometimes two, but even the smallest whisper felt like a victory. Evelyn began to keep a small notebook by her side, writing down every word her daughter spoke, as though recording treasures too precious to lose. Friend, juice, sky, bye, safe, happy. She would stare at those pages at night with tears rolling silently, whispering prayers of thanks for each fragile syllable. The weekends became their ritual. Every Saturday morning, Evelyn would dress Emily in simple clothes, a blue dress, a white sweater, little shoes that could scuff in the dirt, and they would drive to the park. And every Saturday, Marcus and Jaden were there. It was as if fate itself was guarding those meetings. Evelyn found herself looking forward to those mornings with a warmth she had not felt in years. She watched her daughter run, play, and whisper words she had never imagined hearing, and she also found herself watching Marcus more closely. He had a way about him that disarmed her. He was a man who carried weight in his eyes, yet he did not let it harden him. His kindness seemed effortless, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that quietly wrapped around the people near him. Evelyn noticed how he knelt down to tie his son's shoes without complaint, how he listened to Jaden's endless chatter with genuine interest, how he laughed easily without trying to impress anyone. She wondered what his story was. How had he become a single father? What trials had shaped his calm strength? She wanted to ask, but she hesitated, afraid of crossing a line. Emily, however, had no such hesitation. She clung to Jaden with an innocent loyalty, following him up slides down grassy hills across the sand, where once she had walked timidly. Now she moved with bursts of laughter, sometimes even shouting small words when she forgot her fear. "Run!" she called one afternoon as Jaden darted ahead of her. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding as she heard her daughter's first clear command. Jaden shouted back, "I'm running!" and the two of them fell into giggles that lit up the air. Marcus looked at Evelyn then, his smile quiet but proud, and Evelyn had to look away to keep her tears from spilling too quickly. On one of those afternoons, as the children sat sharing crackers on the grass, Evelyn and Marcus found themselves sitting on the bench nearby. For a while they both watched in silence, their eyes following the children's movements as if they were watching something sacred. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "She never had this before," she whispered. "I gave her everything I thought she needed, but I could never give her this. A friend, a safe space, a reason to want to use her voice." Marcus turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You gave her more than you think. She trusts you. Without that, she wouldn't be trying at all." Evelyn shook her head. "I spent years pushing her into appointments, into programs, into therapies. I thought if I just found the right expert, the right system, she'd change. But maybe all I did was remind her she was different." Her voice cracked and she pressed her lips together. "I didn't know how to just let her be." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We all do that," he said softly. "We try to fix what hurts because we can't stand watching the ones we love struggle. But sometimes what they need isn't fixing. Sometimes they just need someone to sit beside them and say, 'I see you, just as you are.' And that's enough." His words sank into Evelyn like water into dry soil. She blinked back tears, her throat tight. She realized then that Marcus was not just speaking of children. He was speaking from his own life. She glanced at him carefully. "You talk like someone who knows what it feels like." Marcus looked down at his hands. For a moment his jaw tightened and then he exhaled slowly. "Jaden's mom left when he was 3. She said she wasn't ready to be tied down. I tried to hold things together, but she didn't want to stay. I thought he'd break from it, but kids are stronger than we think." He learned to laugh again, and I learned that sometimes you have to carry the weight for both of you, until they're ready to carry some of it themselves. Evelyn's heart ached hearing the story. She glanced at Jaden, laughing as Emily whispered something in his ear. "You've done a beautiful job with him," she said softly. "He's kind. He's gentle. That doesn't happen by accident." Marcus gave a small, weary smile. "I just try to show up. Every day, no matter how tired I am. Sometimes that's all they need." Evelyn looked back at Emily, who was smiling shyly at Jaden as if every word she spoke to him was a treasure she was offering. She felt a swell of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she did not have to carry this alone anymore. When the sun began to set, They prepared to leave. Emily surprised Evelyn again by walking over to Marcus and whispering, "Thank you." The words were small, but they carried clearly in the quiet evening air. Marcus knelt to her level, his eyes kind. "No, thank you," he whispered back. "You're braver than you know." On the drive home, Emily whispered more words in the back seat, practicing quietly to herself. Evelyn glanced at her through the mirror, her heart swelling. She whispered under her breath, "You're finding your way back to the world, little one." That night, Evelyn tucked her daughter into bed, but before leaving, Emily caught her hand and whispered, "Park, again?" Evelyn smiled through her tears, nodding, "Yes, sweetheart, again." And as Evelyn turned off the light, she felt something she had not felt in years, a steady, burning hope that tomorrow would not be a battle against silence but a journey into light. The weeks began to melt into one another, and with each passing Saturday, Evelyn found herself anticipating the park more than she anticipated anything else in her life. It was not the boardroom meetings, not the figures on quarterly reports, not the glamorous events she often had to attend for business. None of that compared to the quiet joy of watching her daughter whisper words into the world for the very first time. Each visit seemed to add a new stone to the fragile bridge Emily was building between silence and sound. Some days the words were faint, other days they were clearer, but each one left Evelyn trembling with gratitude. One cool morning, Evelyn and Emily arrived at the park earlier than usual. The air carried the crispness of late autumn, and the leaves had begun to turn shades of red and gold. Evelyn dressed her daughter warmly with a little scarf wrapped around her neck. Emily clutched her small notebook in her hands, the one her mother had given her to draw and write in. Evelyn noticed lately that Emily had started scribbling letters, attempting to write the same words she whispered. It was as though her voice was spilling out not only in sound but also on paper. They reached the playground, and as always, Marcus and Jaden were already there. Jaden spotted them instantly and shouted across the field, "Emily, you came." His energy was boundless, his joy infectious. Emily smiled timidly, lifting her hand in a small wave. Evelyn felt her heart swell. A few months ago, her daughter would never have dared such a gesture. Marcus walked over, giving Evelyn a warm nod. "Good morning," he said gently. Evelyn smiled back. "Good morning." For a moment they simply stood, watching their children gravitate toward each other as though they had been friends their whole lives. Jaden tugged Emily toward the sandbox, where he had already gathered a few plastic shovels and a bucket. "Let's build a castle," he announced proudly. Emily sat beside him, her little hands pressing into the sand. Evelyn watched from the bench, her chest tightening with emotion. Every movement, every glance between the two children carried meaning for her. Each sound Emily whispered, even if it was only one word, felt like a miracle. Marcus sat beside her, his shoulders broad but relaxed. "She looks stronger every week," he observed. Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. "She is. I've waited years to hear her voice, and now every time she whispers it feels like the first time all over again." She paused, brushing a tear quickly before it could fall. "I don't know how to thank you." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to. I didn't do this." "She did." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes searching. "You showed her something I couldn't. You gave her something I couldn't." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe you were both waiting for someone to remind you that you weren't alone." Evelyn turned her gaze back to the children, her chest tightening with unspoken feelings. She had built her life around walls, walls of power, of wealth, of untouchable success. Yet here was a man who had stepped inside those walls without force, simply by being kind, and had shown her daughter how to break free of her silence. She wondered if he knew just how deeply he had changed their lives. The children's laughter broke through her thoughts. Jaden had tipped over the sand bucket, revealing a lopsided castle. Emily whispered something so faint Evelyn barely caught it. "Pretty." Jaden beamed at her. "Thanks. Let's make another one." Evelyn pressed her hand against her chest, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. Later that afternoon, Marcus suggested a walk around the park trail. Evelyn hesitated at first. She was used to keeping her world small, controlled, but she agreed. They walked slowly, their children running a little ahead, their laughter echoing through the trees. The path was scattered with fallen leaves, and the air smelled faintly of earth and wood. "It must be hard," Marcus said softly after a while, "to carry everything by yourself. A career like yours, and raising her too." Evelyn glanced at him, her lips pressing together. It is. Some nights I lie awake wondering if I've done enough, if I've been enough. I've built companies from the ground up, but I couldn't help my own child find her voice. That failure has followed me for years. Marcus shook his head firmly. Don't call it failure. She's here today. She's whispering words. She's laughing. That doesn't happen without you. You held her through the silence. You gave her the foundation she needed so that when she was ready she could speak. Evelyn's eyes blurred with tears. She wanted to argue, to list the countless mistakes she thought she had made, but his words sank into her heart like balm. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe she had not failed her daughter completely. When they returned to the playground, Jaden was tugging Emily toward the swings again. Say higher, he encouraged her. Emily's lips parted and in a shaky but clear voice she said, Higher. Jaden shouted, Yes, that's it, and began pumping his legs harder. Evelyn's hands trembled as she pressed them together, her heart soaring. As the day ended and they prepared to leave, Emily did something that took Evelyn's breath away. She walked up to Marcus, her little face glowing with newfound courage. She tugged on his sleeve, and when he knelt down to her level, she whispered clearly, Thank you. Marcus smiled gently, his eyes soft. You're welcome, sweetheart. You keep going, one word at a time. On the drive home, Emily sat quietly in the back seat holding her notebook. Evelyn glanced at her in the mirror.
Did you have fun today?
She asked softly. Emily hesitated, then whispered, Yes. It was one of the clearest words she had spoken yet. Evelyn nearly pulled the car over just to cry. That night, as Evelyn tucked Emily into bed, her daughter whispered again. Mama? Evelyn brushed her hair back. Yes, love? Emily's lips curved into the smallest smile. Love you. The words were faint but real. Evelyn froze, her chest tightening as tears spilled over her cheeks. She kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering back through sobs, I love you too, more than anything. When she left the room, she leaned against the doorframe, her whole body trembling. For 6 long years she had waited, prayed, begged for these moments, and now they were here, one after another, each more precious than the last. She realized then that her daughter's journey was far from over, but it was no longer a path of silence. It was a path of hope, of courage, of healing, and they were walking it together. And deep in her heart, Evelyn knew that the man and boy who had entered their lives were not passing strangers. They were part of the story now, threads woven into the fabric of her daughter's healing and perhaps even her own. Winter crept in slowly, the air turning sharp with cold mornings and earlier sunsets. The park where everything had begun was now covered in a thin blanket of frost that sparkled when the sun touched it. Evelyn wrapped Emily in a heavy coat and scarf, adjusting her gloves with care before they set out. She could not help but marvel at how different her little girl looked now. Her face carried a light that had not been there before, her eyes brighter, her steps more confident. Silence no longer weighed her down. She spoke now in whispers still, but with intention, with courage, and with joy. They arrived at the playground and found Marcus and Jaden waiting as if it had been written in the rhythm of their lives to always meet there. Jaden bounced on his heels when he saw Emily, his breath fogging in the cold air. You came, he shouted, waving his arms. Emily smiled shyly and whispered back, Came. The sound was small, but it echoed like music in Evelyn's heart. She fought the urge to cry on the spot. The children played in the frost, building small towers of ice and laughing when they toppled. Jaden encouraged Emily to try more words, and she gave them cautiously, sometimes in fragments, sometimes in full. Evelyn sat on the bench, her gloved hands wrapped tightly together as she watched. She felt as though she was seeing a miracle unfold piece by piece before her very eyes. Marcus sat beside her, rubbing his hands for warmth. She's blossoming, he said with a soft smile. Every week I hear a little more strength in her voice. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes shimmering. I still wake up afraid it will stop, that I'll look at her one day and she'll be silent again. Marcus shook his head gently. Voices don't vanish when they've found a reason to stay. And she has plenty of reasons now, you, a friend, a place where she feels safe. That's all she ever needed. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat aching. She looked at him carefully. You've given us so much. You don't even realize how much. Marcus met her eyes, his gaze steady but kind. All I did was see her. You're the one who carried her through the silence. You're the reason she had the strength to speak when she did. Don't forget that. Evelyn dropped her gaze to the ground, a tear slipping free despite the cold air that tried to freeze it. For so long she had believed she was failing her daughter. But Marcus's words planted something new inside her. The possibility that she had done enough after all. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and painted the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Jaden and Emily sat together on the swings. Jaden pumped his legs high, calling out to her, "Say higher again." Emily giggled softly, gripping the chains of her swing. With more confidence than before, she whispered, "Higher." Her voice was clearer, her tone stronger. Evelyn's chest swelled with pride. When it was time to leave, Emily surprised everyone again. She walked up to Jaden, her small face flushed from the cold. She whispered, "Bye, friend." The word friend was clearer than Evelyn had ever heard from her. Jaden grinned, giving her a clumsy little bow. "Bye, Emily, see you soon." Evelyn felt her tears gathering again. She held her daughter's hand as they walked toward the car, her heart aching with both joy and gratitude. She looked back once more at Marcus and Jaden, watching them wave, and she knew something deep in her heart. These two were no longer strangers. They were part of their family's story. That night, as Evelyn tucked Emily into bed, the little girl reached for her notebook. She opened it and pointed to a page where she had scrawled letters in crooked handwriting. It took Evelyn a moment to piece them together, but when she did, her breath caught. The word was love. Emily looked up at her mother, her lips trembling, and whispered, "Love you." "Mama." Evelyn broke down completely, pressing her forehead against her daughter's, sobbing into the quiet of the room. "I love you too," she whispered through tears. "More than anything in this world. You are my miracle." When she finally left the room, Evelyn leaned against the door, her chest heaving with emotion. She walked to her own room, sat at her desk, and opened her journal. She wrote down every word Emily had spoken that day. Came, higher, friend, love. She underlined them, staring at the ink until the letters blurred through her tears. These were not just words. They were proof. Proof that hope could survive even the darkest silence. Proof that love could coax a voice out of hiding. Proof that miracles still happened in the most ordinary places, like a playground on a Saturday morning. Evelyn closed her eyes and thought of Marcus. She thought of how he had entered their lives without force, without expectation, and had quietly changed everything. She knew now that healing came not from wealth or power, not from control, but from connection. And in that truth she found peace. The mansion no longer felt like an empty palace. Its rooms now carried the sound of whispered words, of soft giggles, of hope, blooming like spring after a long winter. Evelyn no longer dreaded silence because she knew it was no longer permanent. It was only a pause between words yet to come. Weeks later, on another Saturday morning, as the four of them gathered again at the park, Emily whispered something new. She looked at Jaden, then at Marcus, and then at her mother. Her voice was soft, but her words were clear. "Family." Evelyn's breath caught. Marcus looked at her, his eyes widening slightly, and Jaden clapped his hands with joy. Evelyn knelt down, gathering her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "Family." And in that moment, Evelyn knew that her daughter's story of silence had ended. A new story had begun, one filled with laughter, whispers turning into words, and the strength of love that had carried them through it all.